I break ChatGPT every day. Like, it gets so much wrong. I have done a lot of research in my life and have a background that enables me to know this.
On this episode of Executive Edge, Simon is joined by Dr. Jill Goldenziel, a strategic advisor on geopolitical risk and expert in international relations.
We worry about people not having the critical thinking skills to understand disinformation when it is put out there by malevolent actors. Now they have to question a machine that is sometimes telling the truth and sometimes not.
Jill discusses the dazzling potential and complex risks of AI for organizations, human qualities, and the responsibility of leaders to nurture these qualities in a world increasingly shaped by AI.
AI can never engender trust. Only people engender trust. And leaders really need to be doubling down on the things that only humans can do, which AI will never be able to do.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Executive Edge, here with your host, Simon Rycraft. Have with me a very distinguished guest, Jill Goldenziel. Jill, thank you again for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
So I'll do the brief background. It is extensive with Jill, but I don't want to leave anything out. It's a very impressive background, and then we'll jump into the conversation. Jill is the CEO of Jill Goldenziel Strategy. She's an executive coach and strategic advisor on leadership and geopolitical risk. Very important topic right now, but as always, and someone I consider as a true expert in international relations. Jill is the professor at the National Defense University and Marine Corps University here in the US, but she's lectured thousands of US as well as foreign senior military officers and senior civilian leaders on topics such as cyber law, law of war, international law, and migration. Jill is also an affiliated scholar at the University of Pennsylvania's Fox Leadership International program. When Jill is not advising or lecturing, she's writing as a defense and national security contributor for a number of publications, including Washington Post, LA Times, Fast Company, Forbes.com, Bloomberg, among others. She's testified before Congress, presented her research at the United Nations, the Pentagon, and on TEDx. In just as way of background, Jill, for add to the credentials, has a degree in politics from Princeton, a JD in law from NYU, and a PhD from Harvard University in government. Super excited to have you on, Jill. So thank you again. Let's jump in. We were talking about this a little bit actually before we hit record, but I'd love to learn more. Cyber's been one of those things that I think topic-wise has been around since technology, at least the modern era of technology, has existed, but something that's forefront, prominent in pretty much every conversation that executives have today. But how did it all start with you? I mean, let's go right back to the beginning. What sparked your interest to get into research in the area of politics and international relations?
First of all, thank you for having me. Everything that I say today, I'm speaking in my personal capacity. I am not speaking on behalf of the U.S. government, the National Defense University, or any other part of the Department of Defense or U.S. government. So thinking back, I'm a fourth generation lawyer. I never found anything as interesting career-wise as I did talking about negligence with my dad at the dinner table. I always thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I got to my junior year of college, and we had to do independent work on top of our regular coursework at Princeton, where we had to take an independent seminar and then write a separate 25-page paper. And I kept writing and writing and writing. Couldn't get enough of it. And I thought, wow, apparently I like this and I'm really good at this. Or so they're telling me. Maybe I should go into academia instead. So I looked around and I realized that all of my mentors had background in law and political science, but they were all really doing policy relevant academic work. They were all engaged with the real world. And I found them, or they found me for a reason, I think. I was really frustrated, still remain very frustrated with a lot of the partisan political dialogue that's out there, and really wanted to do policy relevant work that was evidence-based. And so that ended up being exactly what I did, in a way that I did not expect to be doing it, having never heard of professional military education. But certainly at that point in my life. But one thing led to another, and I found myself really having an opportunity to do a job that enabled me to do policy relevant work, not just in my research, but in my teaching every single day. And so I started teaching Marines. The Marines hired a human rights expert to teach the law of war, and the rest turned out to be history.
Love it. And you've gone down the path now of focusing on technology related topics, or at least that's an area that, you know, people are reaching out to you and pulling you in for conference talks, and I'm sure a lot of you know, guidance to civilian executives as well as military kind of behind the scenes. But how did that evolve in cyber law? Is that something that you were pulled into just because it's so centered and focused in today's world, or is that something that was kind of a passion project on your side as well?
So I was thinking about this when we were talking, and I really grew up alongside the internet, or really the internet came into my life at a time when I was really growing up. I remember getting my first Prodigy connection, if anybody remembers Prodigy, right at the end of junior high. And then growing up alongside the internet, I think we still had dial-up modems when I first got to college. And I saw it increasingly grow from, oh, here's this nifty new thing that is coming into our lives and our homes via these clunky modems, to really central to the way that we live our lives. And the way that we then consumed information became increasingly different and increasingly fast, and also increasingly influential to the way that we live our lives. And when I started working for the military, we were still figuring this out. I mean, we have to still be figuring it out every day, given the pace of technology. But the way that the military seemed to be looking at information and cyber when I first got there 10 years ago was, we always jokingly said, we're going to sprinkle a little bit of cyber on that, or we're going to sprinkle a little information on this. And I had the luxury from the ivory tower to be able to say, no, we need to start thinking about this a little more holistically. And we need to start really thinking about how this relates to strategic competition with our adversaries, and how our adversaries are going to use this for an asymmetric advantage against us. Because unlike really fancy weapons that we hear about all the time being really expensive when we talk about arms sales, information is free. So we need to be able to think about how we understand how our adversaries are going to use this, and then also how we can use this ethically and legally, given our own civil rights and particularly First Amendment that we have in the United States.
And it's a constant topic that comes up in conversations I have with executives around just the speed at which technologies are evolving, and the speed at which they're challenging their organization to understand the innovation, understand how they can leverage the innovation, but also be cautious to the potential risks. Are you constantly asked by execs to give them a summary of how cyber law could impact them? Are you working with, is it the CEOs and the CFOs that are interested? Is it more the general counsel that just want to make sure that they're up to speed on, compliance and regulations? Or is it every exec in every role are just curious, like what am I missing? Because the speed of innovation is nothing like I've ever seen in my somewhat limited career. I mean, it's the last 2 years have been wild. Just keeping up itself is a job. So, are you getting pulled on by certain people in certain fields, or is it a kind of a blanket hysteria of just tell us what we need to know and in order to be compliant, and how can we stay up to date with the latest developments?
I think blanket hysteria is closer to where the where both business and government leaders are right now, because first of all, they're just dazzled. They're dazzled by the potential of what AI can do. And we just don't know yet. And it also seems to be changing day to day. And there's innumerable investment opportunities and innumerable risks that are out there. But what in the conversations I'm having, basic questions of, so how do we understand these new regulations that are out there? How do we understand the AI action plan? How do we understand the regulations from the last administration, et cetera? Like, those questions very quickly turn into, okay, well, what's the big picture? How did we look at this holistically as an organization, thinking about our overall risk strategy and risk profile going forward? And if companies haven't and leaders haven't started thinking about that holistically already, if they weren't already thinking about that holistically in terms of cyber and information, which still many have not, then it's completely overwhelming to think about how AI exponentially changes all of that.
I like the way that you were talking about some of the sessions that you run for, I'd say, your military or perhaps government work, right? In these scenario planning sessions, it's interesting because I've never seen that done in the business world, right? But I could see a huge amount of value that could come from it. So rather than the general counsel worrying about the compliance and and the head of risk,
Yes.
and then the head of supply chain and procurement kind of planning out, talking to vendors and understanding the landscape based on their supply chain and their network, and which countries are they dependent on in their supply base, and HR and everything else. Thinking about it is, could there be some more holistic collaboration across those different departments and fields, perhaps coordinated by a true expert in the field, that then leads them to some scenario planning? Because I think from a risk perspective, scenario planning is really all that you can currently do because of the speed at which the technology is evolving, right? It's not about finding the right expert that has the right answers. It is about understanding what the current landscape means for you, and then planning some scenarios perhaps for next year, and but maybe collaborating in doing that across the business could be beneficial. Have you seen any organizations do that better than others? Yeah.
Think organizations are starting to understand the importance of wargaming and scenario planning early on. And I think that's because with AI, risk gets exponentially greater at every stage of the process. So one thing I talk about, really, whether I'm in government or military circles or whether I'm in corporate circles, is that lawyers need to be involved in the planning from the early stages of the process, because it's much easier to spot legal risk earlier on and mitigate it earlier on than it is for a lawyer to come in and say, no, wait, you can't do that, when you're already at the end of a planning process. And it's easy for me to say that, but it's much harder to get it done, first of all, because certainly in the military, there are not enough lawyers. We can argue a lot about whether there are enough in the corporate world, but there may be a lot of lawyers, but they can't be everywhere, right? And very few of them know how to talk to engineers and tech experts anyway. But besides that, it's just difficult to get everybody in a room holistically talking about a problem. When you have a war game, you see the lights start to go on, because you have people from different backgrounds huddling over a hypothetical scenario, and they start to understand how people with different backgrounds and people with different perspectives think and approach a problem. And by doing that exercise, then they know, wait a minute, there might be some risk here. There might be some kind of issue here. I need to talk to legal. I need to talk to compliance. I need to talk to engineering team. I need to talk to quality about how to address it proactively rather than wait until it's too late.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and ironically, the timing is perfect with having this conversation, because the planning for next year, that is happening across most organizations right now, and historically, it's been budget and organization design and transformation projects. Again, I'm talking purely on the executive and enterprise level, but I can see AI as a topic and cyber risk now being integral to those conversations of like, what do we anticipate will, like, let's reflect on 2025, right? What did we miss the boat on? What do we think we could have done more around? What were the risks that we didn't anticipate and or anticipated and didn't appropriately mitigate? And then how could we change that in 2026? I think that's now likely going to be a annual, if not more frequent, conversation because of the speed of innovation. Let's talk a little bit, and I'd love to understand more. I mean, you've worked in U.S. government, you've interacted with the UN, you've counseled and consulted with dignitaries around the world. What from a perhaps, I mean, I won't say just risk. I could open up the list of topics, but what are key messages that you think you'd like to communicate, or you have had to communicate to policymakers and business execs around what's at stake and maybe they just don't appreciate as much of right now?
I think most leaders are looking at AI the wrong way. I think that we're too focused on how we can use AI to replace human work. And instead, what we need to be thinking about is when humans are actually needed. What does it mean to be human? What does a human absolutely need to do? What do leaders absolutely need to do? And what can they do alongside AI as a teammate, not as a replacement for human labor? We're not training leaders, or leaders aren't thinking about how they can lead AI or how they can lead humans to team with AI. They're too busy thinking about how they can replace their business processes. And along the way, they're forgetting that they're still leading people. AI can never engender trust. Only people engender trust, right? And while it is true that AI will replace some human labor, in most fields, humans who use AI well and learn how to lead and supervise it well will replace humans that don't.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And if you don't know him, I'd love to make the connect. But I just did a recording only 2 weeks ago with Professor Angus Fletcher, and he's at Ohio State University, and he's running their story science program. But he just released a book called Primal Intelligence, and he does some training with special ops forces as well as business executives, and he's very much in that camp, right? And he's a neuroscientist by trade, so for him, he's pushing on the importance of creativity, the limitations that at least the LLM versions of AI tech stacks around creativity, and how that should encourage us to double down, to your point, on forward thinking. How can we use these tools to improve what the humans are doing, and therefore as humans, what do we need to do more of, knowing that some of these other functions are being taken away, right? These kind of more tactical activities that can be accelerated through AI. So fascinating guy, fascinating research in that area. And it seems like, you're out in the field having these conversations, on a kind of a global capacity in a similar, with a similar mindset.
I'd love to meet him. And there's interesting research out there on what we're losing as well, right? Because we're delegating to AI, but then we are losing the ability to do some of those skills themselves. So we need to be thinking about, well, if we're losing that, what else are we losing along the way?
It's scary. It's almost like I've had to pull myself back from using some of those tools, because it's, like, oh, I could get the answer just a little easier, right? Or just type something in, it will come back out. But you know that the response that they're providing didn't take as much processing power, and you lose the learning that the human brain goes through in the journey of trying to solve that problem yourself. So it's actually ends up sometimes being less enjoyable, as a result. So I can see that for sure.
It's addictive too right now, because we're
It
always
is.
trying to see what it can do. And the speed at which these models comes out, then we're trying to see what the next model can do, right? So we're overusing it because we don't know its limitations yet, and then it breaks its own limitations the next time. But I break ChatGPT every day. Like, it gets so much wrong. It gets it miscites so many sources. I tried to look up something on the Iran-Contra affair recently, and it gave me a citation about 13th century Mamluks. Like, there's so much that it doesn't get and doesn't understand. But I have done a lot of research in my life and have a background that enables me to know this. I worry about my kids and the kids that don't, and that are just inherently going to trust it without questioning what went wrong. We worry about people not having the critical thinking skills to understand disinformation when it is put out there on the internet by malevolent actors. Now they have to question a machine that is sometimes telling the truth and sometimes not, through no fault of its own or malintention of its own. At least I hope not. So it's very, very difficult to, I think, supervise as a mom or as a leader, because we don't know what the critical thinking skills are of our employees or our kids, vice the much less the critical thinking skills of the machine.
And that's interesting when you mention about disinformation. I anticipated, and then it hasn't happened yet, thankfully, at least to the same scale. Maybe because the guardrails are being placed, or because they're learning all at the same time. I'm not sure, but I thought 2 years ago we'd be in a world right now where you couldn't trust anything that was online, right? People would be able to use AI models to put a politician's face or a government leader's face, onto a body, and basically just get them to say whatever was needed. So you could no longer trust what you saw on the TV, even if it was from a trusted source. Maybe they got the wrong feed, thought they didn't done their diligence, ended up not being correct. But at that point, information has been disseminated, and the risk has been it's too late to crawl that back. Is that still something that government leaders around the world and dignitaries are concerned about, that will be something we have to face in the future? Or do we think that the general public and everyone have been educated enough to not trust, therefore they are questioning what they see, and therefore that risk is lower?
There are initiatives out there to build more critical thinking and have classes on how to understand whether something on the internet is real. There are more initiatives that have happened in other countries than there are in the US, partially because our education system is so decentralized to the states, and it's much easier in a country like, I believe it's Finland, that has the strongest one that's out there, the strongest K-12 education program on spotting mis and disinformation on the internet. And that's probably what's going to be most effective in the long term for teaching students critical thinking skills and figuring out what the truth is, or at least what falsehoods are. But I think the focus I'm seeing among leaders is really more defensive, how to safeguard our own information from adversaries, and then make sure the relevant parties, whether that's clients or the American people or whatever the relevant or your internal corporate audience, whatever that is, can trust the information that you are putting out as an organization. So much more defensive thinking than how do we safeguard society as a whole from malicious malicious actors in the information sphere.
I mean, I have to imagine that. I mean, it's not necessarily a nightmare currently, but at least something that keeps people up at night. If you work in the PR department, investor relations, knowing that there's this content out there, all the execs' images are all over the internet, they're doing interviews, etc. That there is hopefully policies they have in place in case information is out there that's incorrect or that's been created maliciously, whether for fun or in intentionally harmful, in how to to mitigate that and quickly communicate out that was not authorized by the public. I know some friends of mine, when they have young kids, they'll post pictures of them online, but they'll put like a cartoon teddy bear over the face, right? Because they're like, I don't want my kids, until it's outside of my control, for their faces to be searchable and available and captured on the internet. But you can't do that with execs, right? They're there. That information is already available. Yeah, it's too late, really.
Well, I tried when my kids were young, because every camp, every school, every program after school program they're ever in will send you a form saying, unless you check this box, you consent to your kids being used in our promotional materials, either incidentally or straight shot, whatever. And then I started checking those boxes when they first went to camp. And then the organization would come to me and be like, all right, well, if you check this box, your kid can't play on this equipment on this particular day because we're going to have a videographer there. And all right, your kid's not going to be able to be in the camp photo, and your kid's not do this, and your kid's not going to be able to do that. And then you have your kid coming to you and saying, Mommy, why can't I be in the picture? And I gave up. I had to give up. I mean, what exactly am I protecting my kids from, especially when the kids are getting phones at an increasingly young age and their peers can just start creating videos of them and posting them on YouTube. Like, you cannot control how their images are going to be used, and it is very hard to control how your own image is going to be used at this point.
Yeah. So versus stress and spend time and budget around limiting the maybe the volume of production of content that gets online. It's more just about planning, about if something does happen, right, it's used maliciously, how you're going to respond, and which platforms are probably worth communicating those types of messages out. It's the same with I guess logo changes. There's been something in the news recently, right, where on social media people will comment on their dissatisfaction and things could be taken the wrong the wrong way from the initial intent. But I think that type of planning around cyber risk is definitely keeps the PR team up at night more than I'm sure they really want. I wanted to say thank you again, Jill, for coming on. The level of experience that you have in this particular field is extensive, truly extensive, and it's been great to chat with you and kind of get a little bit of an insight into the scenario planning side of what the governments and military have to go through. Any final thoughts on things that you might want to communicate out on some of the broad topics or fields that you work in out to executive audiences?
AI is not going to replace leaders, and I think we really need to learn how to team with it and see it as a member of our team, rather than just seeing it as a replacement for some types of work or as a cute tool and a novelty as well. And leaders really need to be doubling down on the things that only humans can do, whether that is building trust or building teams or building community, which AI will never be able to do. I like to think of AI as a high school intern that needs very, very close supervision. That's how I treat my LLM. And if I wouldn't delegate something to my high school intern that needs very, very close supervision, and I don't have time to supervise the intern, then I don't want to use an LLM right now because it is not beyond that level yet. And even though it keeps getting better, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Yeah, I love that. That's super helpful. Okay, fantastic. Thank you again, Jill. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.